Assistance webinar. Today's topic is Strategic Action Plan Implementation, Chapter 3, Protocols, Procedures, and Policies, Follow-up Services for High-Risk Youth. We'll start in just a moment, but first let's review some housekeeping items. Please add your full name to the participant list on the left by using the drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner of the attendee box. That will open a small menu where you can choose Edit My Info to enter your first and last name and your program name. All phone lines will be muted, but we encourage you to use the chat box for questions or comments. We'll have a question and answer session later in the webinar. My name is BC Echohawk, and this is a SAMHSA Native Connections webinar. Along with the Native Connections team and our SAMHSA Contracting Officer Representative Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper, we thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, today's topic is Protocols, Procedures, and Policies, Follow-up Services for High-Risk Youth. Our webinar facilitators today are Native Connections colleague Chanel Ford, one of our grantee technical assistants, and Isabel Panas, our project manager. Before we begin, we'd like to open in a good way, and doing that for us today is our colleague and grantee technical assistant, John Bird. John?
All right. Thank you, BC. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Bird, and I live in Tucson, Arizona, but I come from the Blackfeet Nation of Montana, where I was born and raised. And I have a house up there, so I'm going to be moving up there for part of the summer in a week or 10 days or so. So I'm looking forward to going home. Right now at home, all of the ceremonies are starting to crank up. You know, the winter season is over, and people there, the winters there are long and hard, and so people really look forward to the time of the green grass. They talk about how, you know, when they leave somebody, they say, I'll see you again when the grass is green, if they're not going to see them for the winter. So the grass is green, the ceremonies are happening. I've been really encouraged ever since last year. My son made a vow to dance in the Sundance, and so this is going to be his second year in it. The Sundance that he's going to dance in there starts on June 26th, and so I've just been thinking about him a lot, you know, and thinking about the Sundances and the ceremonies that are going on. So for just in honor of all of that, in honor of my son going into the lodge for the second year, and for all of you, you know, my son really struggles, and I know that many of us do in our communities and our families. We struggle with trauma, we struggle with historical trauma, we struggle with, you know, all the mental health issues that are associated with that, depression and anxiety. I've had my share of interactions with those myself, and one of the things that's always helped me has been to sing. And the elders where I grew up used to tell me, you know, if you feel like it, if you get asked to pray or to open an event or something, you know, sing a song. It's the same as a prayer. So I want to open up by singing two push-ups of a Sundance song from where I come from. The Blackfeet people call this number one. So what that kind of tells me is that it's an old song. It's one of the main Sundance songs that they've used in the lodges there for a long, long time. So I'm just going to open that up, and during that song, I'm going to be asking and thinking about all of you and all of the people that you work with, your staffs, all the people there in your communities that you're trying to help. I know that you know, all of us have been touched by suicide. Just last week, there where I'm from in Montana, they buried one of my relatives that died from suicide. And it's hard, and so I want to sing this song to encourage you to. The Blackfeet people say, "Ikakimat," don't give up, try your best. Things get hard, and I think about my ancestors when things got hard. There are times in Blackfeet history and all of our history when things were really, really hard, for our ancestors, and those ones that kept alive and they didn't give up, they're the reason that we're here. And so, I encourage all of you to think about that, Ikakimat, don't give up. Try your best, and whatever you do, don't give up. The work that you're doing is important, it's critical, and I just want to thank you all and honor you all for the work that you're doing. Hey, ha, hey, ha, hey, ha, hey, ha, hey, ha, ha, hey, hey, ha, hey, hey, ha, hey, ha. Hey, hi, hey, hi, hi, hey, hey, hi, hey, hey. Oh, thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Chanel.
Great. Thank you so much, John, and thank you, BC, for getting us rolling. And thank all of you grantees for joining us today. We have some really good discussion here. And as you know, we're starting to explain our Chapter 3 here for you guys and the Procedure, Protocol, and Policy Toolkit. And this chapter focuses on follow-up services for high-risk youth. We did have chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 previously, and we're just kind of wrapping up with this last chapter. And I'm really excited to kind of give you a bird's eye view and a great overview of what this chapter has to offer. So we're learning about safety planning, and the exciting piece is we have an actual example here of templates and resources and best practices. So hopefully you guys can take a bit away from that. And then we will be discussing the applicability and utility of Chapter 3 for your prevention efforts. And also joining us today is Penny Spencer from Spokane Tribal Network, and she will be doing some peer sharing about what it is that they have done in their community for in terms of follow-up services for high-risk youth. So I'm excited that she's able to join us and that she'll be sharing some information. So I will be passing it on over to Izzy to have this next piece of discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Chanel, and thank you to John and BC for getting us opened in a good way, and to Mark for working behind the scenes to always elevate our webinar team to look the best that we can. So my name is Isabel Panath. I go by Izzy. I'm looking at the participant list here, and I'm sure in one way, shape, or form, we've all had an opportunity to kind of get connected, and maybe I saw you virtually through webinars, our regional learning communities, or possibly through an on-site event, on-site regional event that we've delivered over the last year or so. But for those that I haven't had an opportunity to meet, or those that might be new to the Native Connections team, I'm the project manager, one of the project managers for the Native Connections TTA Center. I'm a member of the Nez Perce tribe, and I was born and raised on my tribal homelands in Lapwai, Idaho. And I've had the opportunity to support this work since about 2012, and I've been out in the DC area for the last 7 years. So it's a real honor to be with you guys today to talk about the best ways that we can consider supporting our young people who might be in challenging places or tough spots. So for this particular slide, we always just want to kind of keep at the center the Native Connections approach that guides our work. And shows the approach and the perspective that we work from each and every day, that we get an opportunity to serve our communities in this way. And so as you look at the approach, I'm sure everybody on the phone is very familiar with the community systems analysis, the community readiness model assessments, and the strategic action planning, and then, of course, the implementation of all of those efforts combined. And so just as a reminder for folks, we look at this diagram, this really beautiful graphic to keep ourselves centered on the overall goals of our work. And, this is intentionally built out in a circle because our work is not ever done. And it's a revolving manner. And so the tools that are listed in here are, really at the end of the day to promote connection in our communities and to save the lives of our young people. This particular presentation is going to be, sort of in the implementation phase, where we're thinking about the best practices and the manners of which we provide support in each of our communities. And as Chanel mentioned, this is the final part of this webinar series that we've been in since early March of this year. We are real thankful to have the opportunity to present on this chapter, and so we just wanted to kind of flash up here quickly the procedures, protocol, and policy definitions for those that might be joining us for the first time, and just also as a reminder as we kind of work through the discussion today. So I won't read these off word for word, but you guys can have a look here to see, procedures are, really step-by-step processes, and protocols are sort of guiding the actions that need to be taken, by whom and when. Might also be an example of a formal agreement between two local partners. And then policies, of course, high-level, sort of 30,000-foot plan that, guidelines to kind of support the suicide prevention, crisis response, postvention within our community. All right, Chanel, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks a ton, Izzy. And I apologize, everyone. I didn't even introduce myself. I was just getting so excited about the information we were going to share today, and I forgot to intro myself. So I'm Chanel Ford. I'm a grantee technical assistant, and I'm a Spokane tribal member, born and raised on the Spokane Indian Reservation. And I see a couple of my grantees on here today, and I'm excited just for everybody to be able to hop on and took time out of your days to hear what we have to share. So jumping in, just we're looking at Chapter 3 of the toolkit, as I said before, and kind of looking at safety plans on a deeper level. What does this look like? What can it look like in your community? Giving an example of template and how to construct that template to your community. Also looking at means restriction and what that looks like in your community. What is it? And then resources. We have resources to share with you guys. So first off, we're going to pop right into a question we have here. And so we wanted to ask the questions: if you are trained in applied suicide intervention skills training, also known as ASSIST, and also, are you trained in safety planning intervention, SPI? So if you guys could go ahead and answer that, it will, Izzy will be able to kind of touch on the importance of both of these trainings later on in the chapter. Also, if you do have other trainings that you have completed, please feel free to share them in the chat box below. We would love to see what everybody's been trained in and hopefully grab some resources from there. Right, so it looks like we have a few people that are trained in ASSIST, and majority of people not trained in ASSIST, and majority not trained in safety planning and intervention, SPI. A couple of people do. All right, thank you. And just an overview that's totally fine. We just wanted to grab some numbers to see, who was and who wasn't, and just share the importance. And like I said, Izzy will touch on that a little bit later. So thank you, guys. So it looks like in the boxes quickly, I have mental health first aid training in QPR, question, persuade, refer. You have youth mental health first aid, and sources of strength. So thank you, guys. It looks like quite a few people are trained in QPR and youth mental health first aid, which are both awesome suicide prevention trainings. So like I said, we're going to be diving into safety planning first off. Oh, it looks like somebody else put Native Hope down there. Thank you guys for sharing. It's awesome. Those are all really good. So what is a safety plan? So a safety plan is really a follow-up service, and it's a supportive follow-up service, and it can be a direct plan of service to your community or to a community member. So the awesome thing about it is that it's customizable. So it's meant to be used as a tool, a resource for support, and not a contract. So it's really important that you kind of look at it like that, and Izzy will also kind of touch on that later as well. But it's something that is there for individuals specifically to follow. What is it that they see in a safety plan that they would like to follow, and not so much a contract, because a contract sometimes can deter them from signing some sort of form of support. So it's just a really great practical strategy to help high-risk youth and to help community members during challenging times. So why is a safety plan important? So planning can help save lives if best practices are followed, and like I kind of just stated earlier, these plans will be intentional. So it's really geared towards one specific, it can be geared towards a specific grantee or community member. It has, the great thing about the customizable part is we were able to add in for this plan, can we add in spiritual healers, cultural leaders, and what does that look like for people if they need that tied into their safety plan. And the interesting thing that we found and I'm sure you noticed that while reading the chapter, was that a simple follow-up telephone call can really increase the life of individuals. So on the statistics in this chapter, we went over individuals that received follow-up calls from hotlines. 79.6% stated the calls kept them from killing themselves. 90.6% stated that the calls kept them safe. So something really, something as simple as just doing a follow-up call, following up in any sort of form. And we did have a great discussion the other day. Somebody mentioned that, sometimes we just have to do the simple thing, and this can be that prevention tool, the simple thing of follow-up, checking up, shooting an email. Could that be we create some sort of a social media follow-up tool? And so that's really what we wanted to hone in on, is just knowing that we are the individuals that can make that change happen in the community by something as small as a follow-up call or follow-up email or whatever that looks like. So the next slide here, we have best practices for safety planning. So we wanted to have a discussion here in the chat box. If you guys could please just show share your input here. So this is the question I have for you all. Do you develop safety plans with high-risk youth? And if you could pop your answer or your information into the chat box, that would be wonderful. And then who should help a high-risk youth develop a safety plan? What do you think that looks like? Is that you yourself? Is that mental health services department? Is that Indian Health Services? Is it clinicians? What does that look like? Who do you think should help a high-risk youth develop a safety plan? And then following up with that, we have what practices make safety plans most effective? So what do you think is something that you can follow if you're creating a safety plan and you can follow a practice? What is going to make this plan the most effective? If anybody would like to share, that would be absolutely wonderful. See a couple of attendees typing here, so we'll just give it a few minutes and share out what you all have to say. And it can be anybody. Okay, so I know, for example, in our discussion we were having earlier, it was looking like majority of people thought, oh, I'm going to share what Beverly has down here. So completed a uniform policy procedure for a suicide crisis call. The next step is developing a safety plan that will include high-risk youth. Effective safety plans are resources who are readily available. Oh, I love that. Resources who are readily available. Okay. completed. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. And mentioning in there, developing a safety plan that will include high-risk youth. Yes, that is for sure. So thank you, guys. So we really just wanted to see what you all thought, and Izzy will actually go ahead and share with you guys the information we have here for the best practices for safety planning. So Izzy, if you want to take it away.
Great, thank you, Chanel, and thanks to Beverly for sharing some feedback. And even as we move through these slides, we'd definitely be interested in learning more from other folks on the call as well today, the webinar. So feel free to share any thoughts, ideas, or comments, or even questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we try to find time to circle back to those. So as we were prepping for this this webinar and kind of working through the chapter. This chapter is relatively short, and yet it strikes so much discussion for our team internally. And so, we were talking about the importance of providing that support for our young people during the higher times of need, compared to, if we were to kind of weigh out when our young people are most at risk. A lot of the time it's not during the day when, the local behavioral health department or available local counselors are, within their working hours. And so we were talking about, how do we work to identify proactively avenues that we can support our young people and help them with tools and resources and thought processes during those times of overwhelmed crisis mode thoughts. And so we had a good discussion about that. And so I know we're going to get into that a little bit later as well, but as we think about best practices for safety planning, and safety planning is such a technical term, and really, as we were brainstorming together, and I'm not sure if our coworker Hunter is on the call today, but he brought up a really good point in just talking about, safety planning is really just a more technical term for walking with our relatives or walking with our young people. And so, who should help a high-risk youth develop a safety plan? I really think that our general messaging is it can be anybody who's willing to help and to take the time to be a caring individual, to communicate, to provide follow-up support during times of need, and to really have an opportunity to build that trust with our young people who are at risk. And so, instead of thinking about it as safety planning, we should really be thinking about it from a community perspective, and thinking about all of us, our youth need all of us to walk with them, whether that's during celebrations and times of happiness, or whether that's during turbulent times when things are difficult and it doesn't seem hopeful. And so, anyway, when we think about who should help, we definitely recommend that those who are caring individuals who are willing to become adequately trained and develop their skill sets for intervention, brief intervention, and I know the chapter highlights the assist and the SPI, but folks also shared today some other really great skill sets to be trained in. And so anywho, it really could be anybody who's willing to take the initiative, whether that be a peer, a friend, a cousin, an aunt or an uncle, a professional, a traditional healer, a trusted adult or an elder. And so just some food for thought there. And then thinking about what makes safety plans most effective is, kind of going back to what Chanel brought up earlier in terms of not wanting to make this seem like a compliance matter with relation to, a contract. And, believe it or not, that's kind of been the practice for many years in making the no suicide contracts. And it's really not the best approach when working with a young person who is going through periods of hopelessness struggling with mental health issues are, the things that we see our young people face, troublesome homes, broken homes, unresolved trauma within the family. And so thinking about, not wanting to put ourselves in a position as helpers in this situation, but wanting to, we don't want to put ourselves in a place for youth to feel like we're just yet another person that they might potentially disappoint. So this is really more of a form of support. And then, follow-up, building that trust to communicate and follow up with our young people. It's not enough to just kind of give them a piece of paper with, minimal guidance. I think it's really more of a walkthrough process and helping them kind of brainstorm and think through the best ways to utilize the resource. And then, of course, customizing. So we know not one size fits all, and so we'll share an example of what, that could look like, things to consider when developing a safety plan within your own work. So let's see here. So I'm going to go to the example next. Okay, so in the Chapter 3, I hope that you all had an opportunity to receive that through the e-blast that we sent out, but I also think your GTAs might have shared it with you as well. I don't think it's uploaded to this Adobe for download, but maybe we can get that up there for you by the end of the webinar. But when we think about safety planning, we put a couple of templates that were researched and identified and found online, and then we just took some, we took some time to think through how one could consider altering the template. And so, we kind of used the general framework here, but we reframed some of the questions. And so if you look at the slide deck, you'll notice that there are some kind of variances from the template that's in the actual chapter. And so the way that we customize this is, for number one, we put what activities provide me calm and comfort. And we put that there at the beginning for a very specific reason. We wanted to make sure that right at the outset, if this is a resource that a youth can reference during times of distress, that those activities that they might generally turn to for relief, for comfort, for calmness, for taking some time to become more centered, we wanted those to kind of just be on the outset of that template. And then we built on to the question number 2. I think the chapter might include what are my reasons for living, but then we added on, who and what is important in my life, what's my role within my family and my community, and how can I strive to keep myself encouraged on a daily basis to fulfill my role. And we did that intentionally as well because we know that in each of our tribal communities, we all take a lot of pride and honor in the roles that we get to take for our families, for our communities, for our our school systems or our sports teams, our other extracurricular activities, and so we wanted to make sure that those could be highlighted in this example that we drafted. And then on number 3, we outlined, what friends, family members, mentors, teachers, role models, elders, traditional healers, or other confidants that I call to talk to when I'm feeling distressed. And so we really just added a few additional examples that might be, up for consideration when building out a list of folks that a young person might think about calling during just stressful times. And then the final part of the template here is we added a specific row for traditional healer, elder, or care provider. We thought that would be really important for our young people to know that, it doesn't always have to be sort of the traditional professional, that might be serving the community in one capacity or another. It could really be somebody, a trusted elder or a respected elder, somebody in the community who might be willing to provide support. And then we also, it looks like our template got a little bit discombobulated in this PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint wasn't in agreement with PDF when we put this in here, but you can't see underneath the bottom of number 5, but we added social media. And the reason that we added that is because we know that a lot of our young people, especially those that are in overwhelming situations, don't always feel comfortable contacting folks by phone. And, with the evolving text messaging and the kind of virtual communication with not a lot of verbal opportunities for verbal conversations or phone calls, sometimes our young people feel better using online supports for, outlets to convey how they're feeling or to convey, the things that are heavy on their hearts. And so we added social media, and I apologize that you can't see it there on the slide. And then to kind of close out the example, we listed out, when was the last time that I felt happy? What things provide me hope, encouragement, and faith in the future? And so, kind of starting with a positive on number one, thinking about the things that, bring me calm and comfort, and then kind of working through a few additional questions to get some feedback in, and then kind of ending on a positive with number 6. So I hope that example is helpful for you guys. We'd be happy to provide this in follow-up if you guys would like the Word document to customize on your own or just to use for reference. And so with that, I am very excited to have Penny Spencer with us today from the Spokane Tribal Network. Penny directs this nonprofit organization for the Spokane Tribe, and or in partnership with the Spokane Tribe. And I had an opportunity to meet Penny about 5 or so years ago, and she's I met her doing a GONA training of facilitators for a group of young people within the Spokane tribal community. And it was a really beautiful event, and it was wonderful to see Penny's heart for her community and to just have an opportunity to learn about some of the good work that they're doing to build up their youth, and to always be kind of working to build those avenues for collaboration and partnership. And so I was very thankful that Chanel was able to get Penny to join us today. And so I know Penny's got a lot of good information to share with us. And so we have some questions up here just generally related to safety planning within your community, Penny, but then also, challenges that you might have faced and how you overcame those. And then, just thinking about how your community works together to approach safety planning or building those connections within the Spokane Tribe. And so I'd like to turn it over to Penny. And Penny, I'd like to also ask you if you'd be willing to give an introduction of yourself so folks are able to kind of, know who's on the other line there. And thank you again for working with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Izzy. I just want to thank everyone for inviting me to share our story. I am a direct descendant of the Spokane Tribe, very proud of that, and I've raised 3 of my children on the Spokane Reservation, and now I'm raising 2 grandbabies. And I am, as Izzy stated, the network director for a nonprofit here on the reservation, Spokane Tribal Network, and we are just here to fill in some gaps where it's needed on the Spokane Reservation. STN was formed in 2012, and shortly after that, there was a state of emergency on suicide put out by the Spokane Tribe. And a bunch of us met together. We had T-teams is the name of it, tribal teams. Brought together, it was a grassroots effort, brought together all of the departments that were working together and really did all of our different strategies that we were doing and started talking about how can we work together and try and make a difference. So one of the things that was talked about was being able to put together a triage team that went out and would help the officers and the EMTs on phone calls. What was happening is these calls would come into dispatch about suicide, and our officers or our EMTs would go out and they'd have to sit for hours due to professionals not being available either through our HHS or through Stevens County, which is the county that we're in, not being able to come out and assist these officers. And so we decided that we would put together a team and be able to go through training and be able to assist and the officer until professionals were able to make it to the scene. And so we started that process. It took a little bit because we had to change our tribal law and order codes. And we just finally got a Good Samaritan to pass for our tribal department. So we've persevered through that. It's been, years of getting that to happen. But finally we've got that, and now we're starting to form our teams again and retrain some staff as some have turned over. And so that was one of our main challenges, is being able to get a Good Samaritan law passed that met the tribal needs. And so as far as working together and continuing this, we still have monthly meetings, and we still bring up different services that are needed and how we can support each other. And that's about it. If anyone has questions, I cannot hear because I'm only connected through a landline, so I cannot see the actual questions. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Chanel.
Sorry about that, Izzy. So yeah, Penny, I just was hoping that you could really touch base on looking at seeing the importance that it was needed in your community to have some sort of a follow-up plan and kind of a service that was bridging a gap there. What you kind of touched on a little bit, but what was one of the biggest challenges, and how were you guys able to overcome that? That's one of the questions I have. And then also, if you could give these grantees advice on doing kind of the same grassroots effort, what would you what advice would you give them to kind of if they were going to take this opportunity and kind of run with it? What would you give them advice-wise?
So the biggest challenge was getting the Good Samaritan. And then the second challenge now is trying to set up policies and procedures to be able to work with the officers to make sure that, the site is safe. Okay, go ahead and call in, such as if it's Penny is on call, go ahead and call in Penny and let her know it's safe to come to the site. So that's a really big challenge, is just to make sure that our people, our volunteers, are safe. As far as advice, I would say just to continue to persevere. If you have a plan, such as us, like we had this, it was huge to be able to come up with such a plan of having just volunteers in our community be trained and have this little bit of knowledge to be able to just band-aid that situation. And so we were able to get people trained in that and be able to provide that. And so it's really a great opportunity. The other part that ends up happening is there's not that follow-up that ends up. So possibly there might be a call on a Saturday night, and there's no one to follow up with that person that is in crisis. And so this, really the policies and procedures set forth will be able to provide that. Hey, I talked to Penny. She was the one that came out. You get that connection with a real person, and then that person would follow up with that individual that was in crisis and be able to say, hey, HHS has a person, and so I really recommend that you go and talk to that counselor. I really recommend that you seek out different services. And then that person that is on call, that volunteer, will follow them through that process and hopefully be able to get them some different needs that they might need. And it may not just be HHS. It might be, hey, there is a sweat on Tuesday night. Can you come and join us for that sweat? Whatever it might be, to be able to form that that trust that that person needs. That person, that volunteer, is dedicated to that.
Awesome. Thanks, Penny. So I do have a couple more questions. So just in terms of your Good Samaritan law, so this was created within your community due to the fact that these volunteers that you had trained on your on-call team were not covered insurance-wise. So you guys came up with, okay, we'll create this Good Samaritan law to protect them so that they can be a part of this on-call team. So what did that process look like in terms of making that Good Samaritan law? Like how, what were the steps you took, and then how did you get Tribal Council really on board, and were there any challenges with that?
So this was a lengthy process, and actually Chanel was our Spokane Tribal Network director at the time, and but it was really a team of people that said, hey, let's make this happen. Chanel's the one that volunteered and decided, hey, Spokane Tribal Network will take that responsibility. Looked at what Washington State does as far as a Good Samaritan law, and basically took that to our attorneys, who the attorneys took quite a while to kind of look it over, and then got back. There was back and forth. That took over about a year. And then it kind of sat there for a little bit. No one knew where it was at. And then following it up, because the community, again, was outraged, like, what is going on? Like, we need to find a thing. And so we had to step back up as Spokane Tribal Network and say, well, we have taken it this far. Now we need council to push it forward. And so we met with council, and council said, okay, let's make this happen. We had a big meeting with our officers, council, and Spokane Tribal Network. We hashed out exactly what the issues were, and then within a week it was signed and ready to go.
Awesome.
But again, that sounds like that's a short amount of time, but really that was about a 3-year time frame of just persevering and really Chanel staying connected, and then I took that over, just staying connected and making sure that that was followed up.
Great. Thank you, Penny. So we actually have a question down here in the chat box, and it's from Kit from Lac du Flambeau. And the question we have is, do you have any advice on training for county mental health screeners who may not be culturally sensitive or responsive to people in our community?
Well, what I highly suggest is whatever the training is, whether you do assist, whether you do, we actually reached out to QPR triage, and we did that. We did it as a group, and so we did that training together. The other thing about culturally sensitive, these are people that live in the community. So we are part of the community. We know each other. That might be a first or second cousin that we go out on the phone on a call with. And so we really know the community. And we are that gap between possibly the county mental health professional that comes out. We could say, hey, this is so-and-so, and this is what's going on. And we would be the ones that would build that relationship, and we would see that through, because we're the ones that are trusted. We are the ones in the community. They see us in the community, and so we are those people that volunteer.
Awesome. Thank you, Penny. So in terms of your training, like you just had mentioned, QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, was a training of choice that your on-call team chose to participate in. So what did that process look like? And maybe can you give examples or insight of how other grantees could direct something like this in their community? I guess in thinking of who in your community actually got trained, what did that training setup look like? How did you make that possible for your community to do and to come together so that these grantees can kind of get a little bit of insight on that?
So really we just put it out there as, we're going to provide this service. We're going to offer training on, and it was QPR triage training. And we had just found that based on, I believe it was one of our Health and Human Services clinical directors had found that it was a really good possibility. And so we researched it, decided as a group that that's what we were going to go with. And so we just pretty much put it out there and advertised it. We had different people. We had actual HHS providers. We had people from youth programs that signed up to do this. We had a court person. We had a probation person. We had different people that joined together and did this. It was, I believe it was about an 8-hour course, and kind of did it together, but you could also do it individually, and signed up to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the type of information. They gave great training, and so any training that is decided within a community, I think, would be good. The only thing is that they would want to make sure that they do have policy and procedures with dispatch and with your either chief of police, or if you have a different person responsible for your EMT side, just so that that person that is going out, that volunteer that is going out, isn't going out on a hot call. They're not the first ones on the scene. So the scene is actually stabilized. We know that it's safe, and so that's a main thing too, is to make sure that the volunteer is safe.
Great. Thank you so much, Penny. I really appreciate you sharing all of this information with our grantees. I think it's something, like you were saying, it's very grassroots. It's from your community. Everybody kind of knew it was something that was needed and necessary. So you all went out and did it. So kudos to you. And like I said, thank you so much for sharing. And I know we can provide grantees with information if they still have questions. But right now, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Izzy, and she will share some statistics with us.
Great. Thank you, Chanel, and thank you so much, Penny, for taking some time to share with us today about your guys' experience and some of the key takeaways that have kind of come out of that. It's really nice to be able to learn from our peers. Not have to, maybe reinvent the wheel, or to sort of embrace some of the ideas that have worked for you, some of the concepts and approaches. So thank you so much, Penny. Okay, so as we had kind of all touched on a little bit earlier in the webinar, we talked about providing or ensuring or even vamping up support for our youth and our young people who are at risk or at high risk during the times that crises are more likely to happen, and thinking about how can we best support them if if the sort of general resources or the offices are not open, or folks are not available. And so we went through and we found some statistics that are heart-wrenching, and we wanted to share these with you today to kind of segue into our next section of the chapter. And so we found these statistics from CDC and NIH, and so we listed the links down here if you guys would like to go learn more about this particular study. And so in a recent study comparing suicide characteristics and circumstances among American Indian Alaska Natives, these were the following findings within this particular study. So it says, who more than 1/3 of, or 35.7% of American Indian Alaska Natives were between the ages of 10 and 24 when completing suicide, where, nearly 70% lived in a non-metropolitan area, which to me says resources can sometimes be very limited, and especially for some of our more rural communities. 73% of suicides occurred in a house or an apartment. American Indians and Alaska Natives were twice as likely to have a positive alcohol toxicology result, and close to 15% of suicides completed were affected by the suicide of a friend or family member, or a non-suicide death of a friend or family member. 21% of suicides experienced a problem at school leading up to their death. and 30% of suicides experienced a crisis in the 2 weeks leading up to their death. And that's a very important statistic for me when thinking about this, because we don't just look at suicide as an issue. We know that it's part of a larger, more complex experience. And we know that unresolved trauma in our communities is a really impactful issue. And so 30% of suicides experienced a crisis in the 2 weeks leading up to completion, says that within that 2 weeks, who came in contact with that individual, what signs were being demonstrated during those 2 weeks. And so, just kind of things to consider as we work through this. And then, how the largest proportion of tribal young people died by firearm at 42%. And that's really a good statistic to lead into the next section that Chanel's going to cover here shortly. And then also, second to firearm was hanging, strangulation, or suffocation. And so, and then the next component here talks about completion is more likely to occur at night than during the morning, afternoon, or evening hours, and kind of gets to the heart of the issue of providing support for our high-risk youth during those times of need, those times of maybe higher need. And so, we share these with you as respectfully as one can share statistics, and I know that these numbers are always difficult to read and to hear. And as a matter of fact, as I share these with you, I have a big lump in my throat. And so, thinking about that and using that to sort of encourage and inspire us to find the solutions and the strengths within our communities and in our networks and in our partnerships to elevate our approach to this work to save the lives of our young people. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chanel.
Great. Thanks a ton, Izzy. I just wanted to circle back because we did have a question here on any suggestions about training and cultural sensitivity for folks who might not be from the community, and I think that's a really great question. And so Jeannie Waters had mentioned Bad River Chippewa Tribe near Lake Superior, Ashland, Wisconsin, as part of a zero suicide regional effort, the third region in Wisconsin to do so. So that is wonderful. They've worked with attorneys who specialize in AODA and mental health to develop universal ROIs and safety plans, universal to the region. I love that. So all partners have access to the safety plan that an individual develops and agrees to share. Partners include 2 tribes, law enforcement, schools, social services, mental health providers, etc. That's wonderful because I think that goes right into what Penny is talking about in terms of making sure that everybody's on the same page within in their community while they're doing this plan. But what Jeannie here just touched on is huge in terms of that there's more partners, it's including 2 tribes, law enforcement. So taking that universal plan that you have and expanding that into your region, that's wonderful and huge. So thank you so much. And then Tori has shared that Rapid City, they had a contract to offer culturally sensitive training to the state on a quarterly basis. So they would offer training to non-tribal employees that the state funded. That is absolutely wonderful. I love that. I think that that's something that could be taken into consideration in all communities, especially when trying to implement these safety plans and trying to implement policies and procedures. So thank you guys so much for the feedback. It's all great information. And so just thank you. So, okay, I will go ahead and move forward now. Thank you again, Izzy, for sharing that information. And we are moving on over to means restriction. So taking a look at what means restriction is, what is lethal means counseling, and some things to consider when talking about means restriction. So means restriction, reducing a suicidal person's access to lethal means. So Izzy shared statistics that included, the largest proportion of American Alaska Natives died by firearm at 42%. So means restriction can actually help reduce this number. So it's a comprehensive approach to suicide prevention. And actually a study showed that when lethal means are made less available or less deadly, suicide rates by that method will actually decline. And so means restriction or even means reduction is taking away a something that is used for suicide. So firearms, it could even be medications, and so the important thing to note is that when you do put a prevention plan in place, we can help reduce the completions of suicide. And so we move forward to lethal means counseling. And this can go directly into kind of what Penny is talking about here with her on-call team, and being able to when you meet with these individuals that are feeling suicidal or that have suicide ideation or are suffering from depression, and maybe they've attempted already, being able to have this conversation with them is huge. It's really important. So counseling on access to lethal means CALM, it focuses on not only why people attempt suicide, but actually how. So there are some worries with this, though, that if one means is restricted, if a person that's suicidal will just go to another means. And that's actually called means substitution. So, but really, studies show that the restriction of one method of suicide doesn't actually lead to a rise in more suicide. So we're looking at talking with an individual that's at risk or the family members that are at risk, and going to that home and having the discussion whether, are there firearms in the home right now? Are there other lethal means at home, which that could be medications? And if there are, then you work on a plan. So how are we going to store these firearms away from the home during a crisis? Do you have a gun safe? Do you have a lock box for the disposal of medications? What does that actually look like? And so it's really important, if you're at this point, that you have that open conversation about what it looks like to reduce this individual's access to these lethal means. Okay, I think that is, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it back on over to Izzy, so Izzy can kind of hop into our things to consider.
Great, thank you so much, Chanel. And so, oops, sorry about that. Looking at the things to consider. Something that really comes to the sort of the forefront of this particular chapter is a teaching that I've learned from one of the trauma experts in the field. Her name is Jane Middleton Moss, and she's written a number of books on trauma, and is actually a tribal member. So if you guys haven't had an opportunity to learn about Jane's work, I would definitely recommend looking, into some of the trauma resources that have been sort of provided and founded within her years of experience. But one thing that Jane had taught, she had provided a training that I had an opportunity to participate in, and one of the teachings that I took away from that was, she said people ask all the time about working through trauma. What is the answer to trauma? What are the challenges with, kind of navigating that complex issue that's not always, black and white or high or low or, up or down. And the one thing that she said is, the answer is very simple, and it's talking about connection being the correction. And so, as we think about safety planning, we think about follow-up for high-risk youth. We think about the best strategies to do our due diligence and put our best foot forward in those in that work. I think the connection is really the sort of the terminology that comes to mind for me, and finding ways to build those connections and keep those connections strong and alive, and just having the bravery to sometimes ask the difficult questions, and to be willing to work through that with young people who are working, still working out ways to find ways to express themselves in healthy, positive manners, and being able to build trust in that process, but also to have patience during that process. And so, so with that, we want to wrap up our presentation today by sharing a video with you. I know that we shared some statistics that don't feel good and don't feel good to hear. And so we want to share this video with you to close out today's webinar. So I'm going to ask Mark if he would be willing to get this up for us. And so I think the instructions for this are to mute your phone and to turn up your computer microphones, your computer speakers, excuse me, if you are dialed in over the teleconference. So we will watch this, and then we'll come back together for our official close.
I will get to where I want to go. I still believe in myself. But I limit myself. Not fulfilling my potential. My attitude stands in the way. I'm not sure about myself. I live in a boring small town with nothing to do. The negative energy I feel from the res makes me want to give up. I want to be involved in my culture. My dad drinks every day. I'm afraid he won't be around much longer. I want to change the way my family lives. I wish our leaders would just listen to us. I will get to where I want to go. I challenge myself. My family will be there in the hardest situations. I believe I could do great things. I need to speak up. I know I need to be a role model. We need to watch out for the younger kids. I will stay humble. I have mentors and elders who care about my future. I can go and make a name for myself and prove I can make my dreams come true. When something happens in the community, we all come together. I will get to where I want to be.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that video for us, Mark. I hope that came through for everybody on the webinar okay. And the way that we kind of looked at that video was one youth kind of starting that shift or that movement, and she was able to get other people to come together with her for a larger purpose, and by the end the group grew pretty significantly. And so with that in mind, we hope that our projects and all of the good work that happens in the field every day, or on within the trenches on the ground level, our hope is that we can really always keep that in mind, and finding the best ways to come together in that same manner for our young people, for our youth, and especially those who are struggling. And so finally, we have some resources listed here, and these are also included in your chapter, in Chapter 3. And so if you'd like to learn more about the safety planning, follow-up support and services, means restriction, the SPI training has a free online course to take. So if you guys have some time to share, work through these and share more with your teams, we definitely encourage that. And so with that, I think we're going to go ahead and shift into the Q&A section here. Is there any questions, last-minute questions, before we sign off? Anybody have any concluding thoughts or comments, things that I'm not seeing anybody typing, so going once here. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, Chanel, and thank you, Penny, and again, thanks to Mark and BC for all of your help. BC, would you like to talk about the upcoming webinars?
Sure, thank you, Izzy. So on July 9th, we will be having a webinar, Culture is Resilience, and we're going to have several of your fellow grantees on the line talking about what they're doing in their community to include culture in the programs. And then finally, part 2 of our series on To Live to See the Great Day That Dawns resource that is out there on August 6th, with Gary Newman. We look forward to seeing you folks there. Here's information for Chanel and Izzy if you'd like to contact them for additional information. And as always, we hope you'll complete the survey that will pop up once we close out here, and we thank you for your time. Take care, everyone.